Bibin in terms of oh, sorry. Sorry, I got muted. My audio was muted. What was the last thing that I said? Uh, where where was I?
The posting of second lab, I think.
Okay, fine. Yeah, so I'll be posting the second lab pretty soon, maybe today or tomorrow. So now in terms of the labs, please work with Bibin. He will be evaluating your lab reports. On Google Classroom, I have posted a link where you can, or maybe not yet, but I'll be posting a link where you will be able to upload your lab assignment. And so, yeah, I do not want to introduce too many formalities, but I think it will be beneficial for you only if you prepare for each lab and certainly for a project, a report which will kind of be a record of the work that you have done. And using that report is where how Bibin will be looking at the work that you are doing, and also I will be also taking a look at it. Bibin might work. I'll request Bibin to work a little more closely with you and see how things are going with each one of you. But at least for my benefit, in terms of the details and the quality of the work that you all are doing, so please prepare a report. It doesn't have to be very big, very detailed, but try to keep it professional. And I would say orient your report so that your understanding comes through and your conceptual depth comes across. Also, it should be a standalone so that if suppose somebody else reads your report, that person should get a fairly good understanding of what you have done. So keep those several points in mind. I mean, you all have been TAs, so you know how the best of the UG students perform in terms of these labs and projects. And so you want to try to exceed what you have seen in terms of your TA-ship. Okay, with that, let me begin. So we were talking about the some specific type of FIR filters, and for these filters, the impulse response itself is a complex sinusoidal signal, and it is oscillating at certain frequency f, and its length is capital N samples. And it turns out that the input to that filter, when it is again a single complex sinusoid, itself can be represented in a very similar manner. And then the output of the filter is just the dot product between the filter impulse response, which is this vector over here, and the vector corresponding to the input signal. And we went over the expression of this dot product, and it turns out that it is nothing but a summation of complex exponential samples. The frequency of the complex exponential samples is nothing but the difference between the incoming signal frequency, which is denoted by the small f, and the filter, f naught. F naught is the incoming signal frequency, and the filter frequency is small f. And so what we see is that the output of the filter is just the summation of the samples of this complex exponential signal oscillating at this delta frequency between f and f naught. And then we looked at the expression for this complex exponential series sum, which I have denoted as capital W subscript of n, and it is a function of this delta between f and f naught. And we have seen that the output is the input signal after it gets scaled by this W of n. So last time we looked at the calculation of this W of n, and it turns out to be essentially a ratio of two sinc functions times some, again, complex exponential scalar times the length of the filter. So let us look at this individual terms of this expression. So again, this y of n is nothing but the output, x of n is the input sample, nth sample of the input, nth sample of the output. And what this relationship says is that the input sample, first of all, gets phase rotated. This exponential function rotates the input signal in the phase. And the amount of rotation is given by this product of the delta between f and f naught and the length of the filter, which is capital N. This term only does the phase rotation. It doesn't do the magnitude scaling at all, because obviously the magnitude of this exponential is just unity. In a generic sense, if you take the phase of this complex exponential, which is 2 pi delta f f naught n minus 1 divided by 2, and if you take the derivative of that, it gives you group delay. So what this first term tells you is that if I take that derivative, the answer that I get is n minus 1 divided by 2. Basically, I'm taking derivative of this phase with respect to delta function, or in general with respect to the frequency. And then I divide the result by 2 pi. That gives me the group delay at that particular frequency. But here, that derivative is independent of the frequency, and so I have a constant group delay of n minus 1 divided by 2. And that is something that is understandable because our filter itself is of length n samples. And generally, we feed the signal inside the filter, and we wait for the half of the filter to be flushed. And so that means that our input signal gets delayed by half of the filter length. Okay, so this first term is something that is important, but it relates to some delay aspect and the phase aspect. What we are more interested in for this for the filtering purpose is what the filter does to the magnitude of the incoming signal. Now we will see that this term here is a real valued. Just wait, please hold. Okay, sorry. I'm back. What I was saying is that you will notice that this term here is a real value term. It is not having any phase component to it. And this term does not have necessarily magnitude of 1. So it is this term which determines the scaling that the filter performs. And again, it is a function of this delta f minus f naught and the length of the filter, capital N. So now we are going to plot this function here. I'm going to plot this function for a specific filter for which this f is 0. Remember that our delta function is the difference between f and f naught. And so when I make f to be 0, then what you see essentially is just f naught. Right? So this is just for the sake of simplicity that I am plotting this function for f value of 0. And I'm going to consider two different values of capital N. So first is n equal to 5. When f is equal to 0, this complex exponential just becomes a DC signal. Sine goes away and cosine is all 1. And so I have a DC signal here of length 5 samples. And let us also consider another case where capital N has become 9 samples long. Okay, so now for these two cases, if I plot that ratio of sinc functions, the magnitude of Wn, I have again a typing problem here. This should have been magnitude of Wn. Wn, as you know, is having that complex exponential term also, but I'm not plotting that here. I'm just plotting the magnitude, which is the ratio of those two sinc functions. Then these are the two answers that I get. The blue answer is for n equal to 9, and the red is for n equal to 5. Now there are some observations. One is that when delta f minus f naught, in this case it is simply just the negative of f naught. When that is 0, I get the maximum, the highest value equal to n itself. So for n equal to 9, the peak is at 9. For n equal to 5, the peak is at 5. As delta f minus f naught increases either in positive or negative direction, then this magnitude starts tapering off. And I always see the first null at plus minus 1 over n. And so for n equal to 9, I see the first null at 1 over 9. And for n equal to 5, I see the first nulls, the two nulls on either side at 1 over 5, which is 0.2. And then I keep on seeing the nulls at multiples of that. So not only at 1 over n, but also at 2 over n, 3 over n, and so on. So not only at 0.2, but again at 0.4 for n equal to 5 case. The last point is that the extreme values are always either 1 or minus 1. In this case, both of the values are 1. But if I have even values of n, maybe 6 and 10, then these values may come out to be minus 1. But they are always either 1 or minus 1. These are the three key observations. Well, one more observation from this diagram is that the extent of my frequency plot on the x-axis is from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. Why is that? Anyone? Why did I not plot it outside of negative 0.5 to positive 0.5?
Sir, with respect to that, okay.
No, so Anudeep asked whether f is from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. No, f is equal to 0 in this case, meaning my FR filter frequency is 0. That is just one specific case that I have taken. That will be my other question to you. But right now, I'm saying that f is equal to 0. Delta f naught, which is the frequency difference between f and f naught. In this case, it will just become negative of f naught. Why am I just plotting it from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5?
So the
So
thing we
maybe
discussed in the last lecture, uh,
so
with
maybe it will
respect to,
repeat after like
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
interval is one.
yeah,
Yeah. So right. So both Pavesh and Divi are correct. So in the last lecture, we said that when we consider the normalized frequencies, which this f and f naught both are normalized. Remember, they are not the absolute frequencies. These are really not even frequencies. They don't have any unit at all. We think of interpret them as frequencies just the same way that we interpret this index n as indicating the time domain index. But n also doesn't have any unit like seconds or anything. Same way, f is the ratio of two frequencies in hertz, the actual incoming frequency and our sampling rate. And that ratio is always going to be uniquely defined only between -1/2 to 1/2. That is called the base period. Or you can call it uniquely defined from 0 to 1. That is basically the lab that you will be working on over this week. And so that is why I plotted this from -0.5 to 0.5. The other thing is that other way to look at it is when we talk about this small f, if you do want to interpret it as the actual frequency, you can say that the sample rate f of s is 1 sample per second, and therefore my incoming frequency in hertz is exactly equal to this small f or small f naught. In that case, you can give it a unit of hertz also if you wish to.
so can you repeat this point? The one that you said about.
No, what I'm saying is that this small f, as we know, is the ratio of the actual frequency in hertz divided by the sample rate, f of s, which is also in hertz, samples per second. It is also having unit of 1 over second. So it is also, f of s is also in hertz, sampling rate is also having unit of hertz, and incoming frequency, capital F in our previous lecture, was also in hertz. But there the capital F is the actual continuous time frequency. If you want to interpret this small f also as a real frequency whose unit can be given as hertz, you can say that I have made sample rate f of s to be 1 sample per second. And in that case, the ratio becomes the actual f itself. Capital F divided by f of s, when f of s is equal to 1, is same as capital F. So what I'm saying is that this small f can be thought of as normalized frequency, either unitless, or you can give it unit of hertz also, provided that you say that my sample rate is 1 sample per second. Whenever sample rate is not 1 sample per second, you can't give any unit to this small f. The reason I am mentioning that here is because in our previous session, we said that there are only certain frequencies for which the sinusoidal signal remains periodic. And those frequencies are determined once f of s, the sample rate, and capital N are fixed. Do you remember what those frequencies are?
So for small f, the base range was minus half to half.
No, the base range is minus half to half, but within the base range, we said that there are only certain frequency locations. If the sinusoidal signal has those frequencies, then only it is periodic.
So
Remember
1
that-
by fs.
Yes, sir.
Remember we said that
The integer
the
multiples of f.
integer multiples of
Uh, Sir, so if we have, sir, I think f should be a ratio of integer, ratio of integers, like some k by n.
correct k by n.
Yes.
What was the minimum value we said that time?
So
When-
1 by
So
fs.
so f will be 1, like, I mean,
Yeah,
k,
so k is 1 and n is the value it is.
yes,
So we said that the minimum resolution that we have is fs divided by n. And then all multiples of fs divided by n. So fs divided by n, 2 times fs divided by n, 3 times fs divided by n, all the way up to n minus 1 times fs divided by n. Only those frequency locations within this base range of 0 to fs in the absolute frequency domain, or in the normalized frequency domain, fs is equal to 1, remember. So in the normalized frequency domain, the unique locations at which the sinusoidal signal remains periodic are 0, 1 over n, 2 over n, 3 over n, all the way up to n minus 1 over n in the base range of 0 to 1. Is it clear?
yes, sir, yes, sir.
Maybe just for completeness, let me quickly flip through those slides. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. And specifically, I'm saying that when in the normalized domain, when we interpret fs to be 1, then it's only this frequency locations, which is 0, 1 over n, 2 over n, all the way up to n minus 1 over n, because now f1 is just 1 over n. So these are the locations at which this discretized signal is periodic. At all other locations, it is not periodic at all. Okay, so you will see that there is a curious observation that we make here, and hopefully we will see the implication of this observation, that at the locations at which the complex exponential is remaining periodic, over here in this plot, we get the nulls of this magnitude function. All the locations which are integer multiples of 1 over n, we get nulls. So that is also an interesting observation of this plot. And we'll come to that later on.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, previously we have seen that when we are sampling in discrete time, we are getting periodicity in the spectrum.
Yeah.
So, sir, what exactly we are doing? Can you explain a little more when we are taking this Wn del f comma f naught? What exactly, like, we are taking samples of weight in the time domain? Means
We are taking samples of the weight in the time.
like we are saying we are sampling in one domain and we are observing periodicity in the frequency domain. So is that concept also valid here? Like we finally find out that this del f comma f naught in the x-axis, we are saying that this entire thing will be periodic if we go beyond minus half to half. So, sir, I'm not able to actually visualize. Is this the same thing or not?
Okay. There is a duality. Whenever you sample in time domain, the frequency domain becomes periodic. It has nothing to do with what type of signal it is. Here we are taking complex exponential signals. I mean, both our filter and the input, we have taken them to be complex exponential functions. It doesn't have to be complex exponential. You can come up with any signal you want. It can be just the white noise, or it can be some signal coming out of electrocardiogram. Doesn't matter. Any signal, whichever shape it is, any arbitrary shape, as soon as you sample it, the moment you sample that continuous time signal, right away you have to associate what is happening in the frequency domain. In the frequency domain, the spectrum of the original signal becomes periodic. That is the first observation that we made in the previous lecture, previous session. It has nothing to do with the type of signal that we are encountering. It is some fundamental property of the sampling itself. It's almost like you are sampling the time axis. So you are not actually even looking at what is on top of the time axis. There is obviously some signal. Here that signal is complex exponential. It can be a triangular signal. It can be a rectangular signal. It can be any strange signal that you can think of. So we are not even looking at y-axis in the time domain. All we are saying is on this x-axis, which is continuous, I'm going to discretize. The moment I say that my my time axis has been discretized, immediately I have to say that the counterpart of the time axis, which is the frequency axis, has become periodic. And there again, I'm just looking at the frequency axis only. I'm not looking at what is on the top, what I'm plotting on the top of the frequency axis. So no matter what type of spectrum it is, because the frequency axis becomes periodic, that spectrum also in turn will become periodic. It's not really the property of the spectrum, the magnitude, this Wn delta f naught. That is not even material at this sense. It is that this frequency axis here itself has become periodic. And so whatever I plot on top of this frequency axis also will necessarily become periodic.
Yes, sir, I got it.
That particular observation is what we are now applying for a specific case. Remember, this particular topic that we are now considering is for a specific case when the time domain input is a complex exponential and the filter itself is also defined by a complex exponential function. And so obviously that periodicity in frequency domain will apply because both are discretized in time. And so therefore, when I plot this Wn, which is a function of this small f, or a function of this small f naught, if I fix f, which is what I'm doing here, I have fixed my filter. It is defined at certain frequency, which is small f. And then what I am doing is I am examining what is the output of the filter when I feed it another complex exponential at f naught. That is what I am examining. And what I am observing is that my output is going to be input times this capital Wn delta f naught. And what is happening to the magnitude is this ratio of sinc function. And this magnitude function has to be periodic because this f naught is periodic. And so that is why I have plotted it here only over the base range of the frequency domain. Okay, now one question that I will ask is, or actually the answer is here in this diagram itself. This particular example is for a case when f is equal to 0. That is when these two charts apply. What is f is what if small f is not 0? What if my filter coefficients, I have not defined it using f equal to 0? Maybe I defined it using f equal to 0.1. Then how will these two charts change? Can you say that? Did you get my question? Anudeep is saying that center will shift from 0. That is not the right answer.
So not the center, but the nulls won't be in the same place, right? The
No,
location of nulls.
no. All I'm saying is that instead of f equal to 0, what if I make f to be non-zero value?
It
How
won't
will-
be a swing function, first of all. I mean,
How will these two charts change? That is all I'm asking.
The mean will be shifted.
What is the meaning of mean?
The peak value of the sinc function will be shifted.
That is what Anudeep said. Anudeep also said that the sinc function will get shifted. I'm saying no. That is not the right answer.
Position of nulls will change.
No. What is the x-axis here? It is
so the difference.
yeah. So if I change f, how does it matter?
So it won't be restricted within minus 0.5 to 0.5.
Okay.
I mean, the
So
difference will be
Kishan gave the right answer. Kishan, can you speak out? Kishan got it. So I want Kishan to just give the answer. Turn your microphone on, Kishan. Kishan, you are not audible. Okay, his microphone is not working, so I'll just speak on his behalf. It will have no, if I change small f, this plot, the magnitude of the spectrum plot, W and magnitude will not change at all. Because this plot is a function of delta between f and f naught. If I change f, how does it matter to delta? Delta is still going to be still the difference between f and f naught. But the interpretation of this chart will indeed change, like what Anudeep and Divya were saying. The way I interpret this chart is that when f is equal to 0, the filter gives the highest amplitude of capital N. It actually magnifies the signal when f naught is also 0, meaning that delta is 0. But if I make f to be 0.1, then the filter will magnify the input at 0.1, meaning that it will magnify a signal for which this delta f naught is 0. Does it make sense? I'm not, see, this Wn is not a function of the absolute f naught. It is a function of the difference between f naught and the filter frequency f. And so if I change the filter frequency f, but if I still plot Wn as a function of the difference, that difference will still remain between minus 0.5 to 0.5, and the peak will always happen at the value of delta to be 0, when the delta value is equal to 0. But when the delta value is equal to 0, what the actual input frequency is, that will change. When f is equal to 0, f naught will be 0 at this peak location. When f is equal to 0.1, f naught will be 0.1 at this peak location, and so on. So the right-hand chart will not change, but the way we interpret this right-hand chart, the magnitude of the Wn chart, that interpretation will change. Whereas this chart on the left-hand side, which are the impulse responses of the filter, they will obviously change if I change f. First of all, here the filter impulse response is only real valued. Now it will become complex valued, and the imaginary and the real components will now become cosine and sine. The point that I wish to make is that this filter is going to pass and actually even amplify only that signal whose frequency matches with itself. And so momentarily we will be calling this filter a matched filter. It will be happiest, so to speak, to use a non-technical term, whenever it sees an incoming signal which is matching with itself. That is when this delta is 0 and it will be giving the maximum output. And it will be rejecting, completely wiping out an incoming signal whose frequency f naught differs from f by a multiple of 1 over n. If you feed such a filter an incoming signal whose frequency f naught is at this multiple of 1 over n in this delta function, then you will see nothing at the output. On the other hand, suppose there is some filter frequency small f, and if you feed to that filter a signal whose frequency f naught is only let's say roughly about 0.07 away from the filter frequency f, then it will attenuate that signal by roughly factor of half. This, instead of 9, it will have roughly become 4.5, and so on. So the way for you to think about this is, you think of this as a filter. We are talking about a filter. The coefficients of this filter are defined by this complex exponential function rotating at small f. And now we are feeding it another signal at f naught. And as this F naught starts coming closer and closer to F, the filter output becomes stronger and stronger. When is it the strongest? When F and F naught are the same. When is it the smallest in the absolute sense?
Maximum difference.
When the difference is multiple of 1 over n. What if neither of these two is the case? Well, then actually you will see something at the output of the filter. How much you will see, that depends on this difference. In general, you can count on this, that if this delta is big, if it is, and by big I mean compared to this range, minus 0.5 to 0.5. If it is very small, maybe 0.01, 0.02, even 0.05, then although the input signal x of n is not matched to the filter frequency f, you will still see that input signal at the output. Because, I mean, most of the time you will not be lucky. And most of the time, this filter will not completely eliminate the signal that is coming in at the input. That is what ideally we would like the filter to do. We would like this filter, because it is oscillating at frequency f, we would like it to be a perfect match filter. And a perfect match filter registers an output only when the incoming signal frequency f naught is exactly equal to its own frequency f. As soon as it deviates even slightly from its own frequency f, meaning that as soon as this delta becomes even slightly non-zero, either in positive or negative, we want that filter to just completely eliminate the input signal. I mean, that is the meaning of the English word filter, right? What we are finding out from this chart is that we will get that ideal behavior that we would like only when that is my question to you. When we will have a filter which will behave in this ideal manner that I was just describing. Yeah, Nemishi, there is a lot of background noise. You can mute your phone and just type on the. Okay, so Kishan said that when we have large value of n, which is the right answer, I think that is what Nemishi was saying. You will see that when we went from 5 to n, the filter started becoming little more ideal. As I keep on making n larger and larger, what will happen is the number of these null locations will become more and more. Remember, it is total of n such locations, 0 to n minus 1 divided by n. So I will have a lot more nulls first of all. And so the chances are that the incoming signal frequency will land right on the top of a null. But more importantly, this peak itself will become large because we are making n large. And so compared to that peak, these other ripples will start appearing smaller and smaller. Remember, this smallest ripple is 1, the largest peak is n, and so the ratio is 1 over n. And so as I make n large, that ratio starts becoming 0. I didn't plot it here, but you can visualize that if I make n to be 10,000, for example, this will be pretty much like an impulse function at 0. Right? So when we make n to be large, then we have that freedom. And we will be able to actually eliminate at the output of the filter any signal that does not match its frequency. Whenever we are constrained by small n, then we have to be careful. That filter may or may not work entirely as we expected. Okay, so now I'm going to just momentarily pause here. I'll be back in just a few minutes, okay? Just bear with me.
Hi, I have a suggestion. Please don't send the chats to sir in a private message, okay? Please put it as an open chat so that everyone can actually see what others are saying. That's what happens in a class, right? When you speak, everyone can hear. So if you send a message to sir in as a private chat, then the others are all, like we are actually blind. We don't know what is happening. So please do that.
Hello, I'm back. Okay. So one more point that I wish to make before I go to the next chart is that uh, this filter, we said that it will start working like our ideal conceptualization of a filter when n is very large. So that is, yes, obviously the case. But even when we are dealing with some small values of n, one thing we can say that this filter actually still tries to do its job very well, provided that the input signal frequency relative to its own frequency is such that that input signal frequency is periodic. Why do I say that? Is because if I take this small f to be 0, which is the simplest case, you will see that at the locations at which the input signal remains periodic, which we discussed at the beginning of this session, are all integer multiples of 1 over n. if I just focus on those locations of the frequencies, then this filter, even n equal to 5 filter, which is a pretty small filter, it still does its job perfectly, because it will let only the frequency corresponding to its own frequency pass perfectly with the maximum gain, and it will completely eliminate all the other frequencies. Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
The frequencies which are not relatively periodic. By relatively periodic, I mean f naught relative to f is not landing on this multiple of 1 over n, meaning that this x of n is not periodic in that sense. That is where the filter gives up, and it can't do its job very well. So that is one other observation, that even at small lengths of lengths of the filter, small values of capital N, the filter still rejects the incoming signal provided it is relatively periodic to its own impulse response. Okay. So now I'm going to change the focus a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the one important problem. This problem is present in too many different domains. Okay, I cannot exaggerate the applicability of this problem, although I'm defining it here in a very simplistic manner. I do not want you to think that just because we are talking about this topic in the third or fourth lecture of the semester, a simple problem, or it is not a relevant practical problem. This problem appears in radar engineering. It appears in cognitive radios. It appears in even the basics of wireless or wireline communication receiver design. Because almost in all, whether it is wireless or wireline devices, anything that you can think of which receives electromagnetic radiation, and based on that it is able to perform its task as a communication system, the incoming signal frequency is always sort of unknown. And before the system can do anything, it has to estimate the incoming signal frequency. And so this is a very relevant problem in the engineering sense. Incoming signal frequency, we don't know. The simplicity that I indeed have made in this slide is that I'm assuming that the incoming signal is just one single complex exponential at f naught. That obviously won't be the case in the real world systems, but to a large extent, many of the real world signals can be approximated like this. Certainly there are scenarios in which that approximation falls apart. But in many cases, that approximation holds, and it is called narrowband approximation. Maybe I should write it down here. I'll make it a note. I will put a sub-bullet here to say that this is an approximation that applies to even the real-world signals which are not complex exponential signals. And this approximation is called narrowband approximation. So we would like to obviously determine this incoming signal frequency before we can do further processing. And so this problem is called frequency of arrival estimation problem. And specifically for this problem, we are mostly interested in what our filter will do for us. As we said, if we deploy this filter to solve this FOA problem, now there are other ways of solving the FOA problem. But suppose if we do this frequency of arrival estimation using the filter that we were just looking at, then what we are interested in is the output of the filter in terms of the magnitude. And that is where our matching property of the filter we will leverage upon. If we just close our eyes and say that this filter is ideal filter, then what will happen is the filter will register a strong output only when this delta f naught is small. If delta f naught is large, then the filter output will be small. And so at least if we put only one filter, and one filter will not do, we will have to put multiple filters. But if we put just one filter, and we just keep on looking at the output of the filter as the incoming signal frequency, for example, keeps on changing, then the moment at which the output of the filter suddenly becomes strong, that is when we can say that, okay, the incoming signal must be at this frequency small f. And that time what we are doing is we are just observing the output of the filter in the magnitude only. We are ignoring the phase. And so we are looking at the magnitude squared of yn, which is yn times yn conjugate. Also, in this particular problem, mathematically, because f naught is unknown, we will model our input signal not as a deterministic signal, but rather as a stochastic signal. And so we will be actually considering kind of the average value of yn squared, or specifically the expectation of yn times yn conjugate. Okay. Now, remember we have defined yn to be just the inner product of the w filter coefficient vector and the incoming signal vector inside that tap delay line. Therefore, when I take yn times yn conjugate, this expression has to be Hermitian transpose. And so yn is here, and then yn conjugate becomes xn Hermitian times this filter weight vector without the conjugate operation. And then I take expectation of the whole product. But here, this filter weight coefficients are not random. I mean, I have set them, so they are deterministic. And so I can bring this expectation inside, take the w vectors outside, and this is what I get. Now, xn we have defined earlier, it's an n cross 1 vector, so this is a matrix, and it is known as the correlation matrix. And therefore, this frequency of arrival estimation problem is solved by taking the correlation matrix of the input and then performing this operation on top of it. Okay, now before we proceed, and I think I'll stop in another 5 minutes. One thing that I want to bring to your attention is that what you see inside these brackets, these rectangular brackets, there are two observations. One is that the quantity inside the bracket, it looks like a lot of vectors getting multiplied and all, but the result is going to be just a scalar. That is one observation. The second observation is that that scalar is going to be real value, no matter what this x and w's are. In general, they are complex valued, but this is going to be always real value. And the third, actually, a sub-bullet of the second point or the third point, whichever way you want to look at it, is that it's not only going to be real valued, but it is going to be always non-negative. So the three different things I said. One, that it is scalar. Second, the scalar is real valued. And the third is, it's not only scalar, it's not only real valued, but it is non-negative. It can never be negative. The first one, probably all of you are able to see. Here, all that I'm doing is, okay, fine. Let me not give that answer. Can anybody say how to justify those 3 points?
So we are taking norm square. So norm means we'll take.
No. Joel, don't go there. I think maybe in a way I already gave you the answer. But suppose if I had not told you that this entire expression is norm squared and all that. By the way, this is not norm squared. This is just the absolute value squared. Norm comes when you're talking about the vectors. Here I'm talking about just a scalar. Y of n is just a scalar. I'm just taking absolute value squared.
So the non-negative part is because it's an expectation. So
no. Expectation can be negative. Bhavesh, I mean, there is no reason why expectation has to be positive. And to continue what Joel was saying, I think in a way the answer is already there in the way I formulated it. But what if I did not give you that answer? What if I told you that this is just the statement of the problem? Let us say that there are 3 vectors, A, B, and C. Or actually, no, sorry, what am I saying? There are 2 vectors, A and B. A, I will call it to be W, and B, I will call it to be X of n. No matter what specific values A and B take, A and B, by the way, A and B are vectors, and the elements of A and B can be complex, and they can be positive and negative. They can be just some random values. I am not putting any constraint on the values of the elements of these vectors A and B. What I'm saying is that if I do A Hermitian transpose B, B Hermitian transpose A, then the final answer is going to be a scalar, it's going to be real valued, and it is going to be always 0 or positive. It will never be negative. Okay, the first answer, the answer to the first point, with why it is scalar, it is just, you have to just do the matrix size notations. So let us say that A and B both are n cross 1. So A Hermitian transpose will be 1 cross n. 1 cross n times n cross 1 is just scalar. Or alternatively, this B Hermitian transpose is going to be n cross 1 times 1 cross n. So it's going to be n cross n. That is why this is an n cross n matrix. But that n cross n matrix, I am left multiplying and right multiplying by 2 vectors. The one on the left is 1 cross n. The one on the right is n cross 1. So if I have A Hermitian transpose, in the middle it's n cross n, and then on the right hand side it is n cross 1, then 1 cross n, n cross n, n cross 1. The final answer is going to be 1 cross 1. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So the reason why it is scalar, it is clear. The other 2 points we can observe it by noting that if I consider first term, which is A Hermitian transpose B, then that term will have A1 times B1 plus A2 times B2 plus all the way on to AN times BN, right? So far, we can't say anything about whether it's going to be real valued or even positive. But then what we are doing is, we are multiplying that same vector with its Hermitian transpose. So if I consider that first vector, which is, first scalar, remember it is A1 times B1 plus A2 times B2 plus A3 times B3. The total sum that I got ends up being just a scalar. And that scalar can be any complex number. But if I take that scalar and multiply it by its Hermitian conjugate, which is for the scalar, it is just the conjugate. If I take any complex scalar and if I multiply it by its complex conjugate, what do I get?
Positive real number.
I get the square of the magnitude of the complex number. In the polar coordinates, it is the square of the length of the complex number. That length can never be negative. At the most, it can be 0. So that is the way you want to interpret this type of equations. Okay, now with that in the mind, we will look at least one property of this correlation matrix. By the way, this correlation matrix that we have defined here as expected value of xn Hermitian, it is a symmetric matrix, but it is a very specific type of symmetric matrix. In general, the symmetric matrices are said to have real valued numbers. Whenever a matrix is symmetric, meaning around its diagonal, the upper triangular part of the matrix is a mirror image of the lower triangular part. So it is symmetric, but symmetric in the specific sense that the upper triangular part of the matrix around the diagonal is a complex conjugate of the lower diagonal. Such type of matrices are called Hermitian matrices. And this correlation matrix is a Hermitian matrix. So in the lab that I was telling you at the beginning of today's session that I'll be preparing, I will ask you to come up with a correlation matrix yourself and check that whether it is Hermitian or not. Right now, you just take my word for it. It is a Hermitian, but you can show it to yourself, both using some simple math and also by computer experiment, that these correlation matrices are always going to be Hermitian. I'll take just one property of this correlation matrix, and that property says that it is always going to be positive semi-definite. In other words, no matter what vector A that I pick, provided its dimensions have to be matching the dimension of this correlation matrix. For any vector A, if I perform this calculation, A Hermitian transpose RXX A, then the three things that I just said. One, the answer is going to be scalar. Two, it is real valued. And three, it is always going to be less than, it is always going to be greater than or equal to 0. This is now we are talking about the property of this matrix. Positive semi-definiteness is the property of the matrix. Here we are saying that that property applies to RXX. If I pick any other matrix, if I generate any random matrix, this property won't be applicable. Yes, the answer will be a scalar for all the matrices, but it may not be real valued, and obviously it may not be non-negative. But for the Hermitian matrices, the matrices which are symmetric in complex conjugate sense, this property holds. And in a way, we already looked at why that has to be the case. Right? In the previous slide, that is what we have discussed. Okay, so I'm going to end over here. When we meet next time, I'm going to go over some other properties of this correlation matrices, and then I'll continue on this problem of frequency of arrival estimation. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Any questions? Okay. If not, then I will stop this session, and I'll see you on Monday. I'll give you this other lab assignment also today or tomorrow. I think the first assignment that I have given you already, hopefully, well, yeah, let me know how you are proceeding with that. And then depending on that, I'll set the due date for the second assignment on the correlation matrices, the properties of correlation matrices. I do not wish to spend too much time on these first few labs because I have a specific project in mind that we should get to probably in another week or so, or maybe 10 days. Okay, so that is all from me for today, and I'll see you again next Monday, again at 10 o'clock.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, it will be better if you could share slides up to which I have completed. So,
Yeah, yes. Yeah. No. Komal also reminded me about that once earlier. It's just that I'm forgetting to post the slides on Google Classroom. I'll do it today itself. I'll post all the lecture slides over there. Actually,
okay.
I'm recording this video also, so I will be. It should be possible for me to upload this video somewhere, but if not, the video I will at least put the slides on Google Classroom.
I haven't registered yet. Today I'll register the course. And sir, I want a Google Classroom link to join join this class. So today's the last place. Yeah.
Okay, this is Priyanjali, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. I'll send you Google Classroom link. Actually, the Google Classroom link is just that, but you will need a code to join. So you just go to classroom.google.com and then you use this particular code I'm giving you right now. This code. Just use this code and you should be able to join. Okay. Priyanjali, did you see the code?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In the chat, I've seen. Thank you.
Okay, fine. All right.